Welcome back, everybody. You can see some Nalguidan fans in the audience rooting for the man who just tied up the series to become the first South American representative to make it to the World Championship. The crowd have been amazing all week, and now we are getting very close to the conclusion, Darok. Hopefully not just for this series, but for the whole tournament, because I can't wait to crown a champion.
I cannot either, and it's going to be a pretty intriguing match to get things going. Recently, DreamHack Summer, some of the craziest games that I had the pleasure of casting were Shudderwock, Shaman, Mirrors. Some truly absurd stuff can occur in these matchups. And as always with Mirrors, it's very, very important who ends up taking this series, because Nalguidan taking a pretty expected win with his Recruit Hunter, Viper with the Even Warlock. This is starting to get down to crunch time. One victory here could mean all the difference in the world.
So how does the mirror matchup work there? Is it just an arms race to draw cards? Is there other places where you can find little edges and little small percentages?
I mean, it's kind of a dual-pronged attack you need to be making. The primary arm is obviously drawing cards. That's number one, as Sottle beautifully demonstrates with his arm. The second one is trying to give yourself the most likely and the best Shudderwock to activate as possible, and there's a couple of ways you can obviously do that. If you have Murmuring Elemental in your deck, as Viper does, going for a play like Murmuring Elemental into Grumble on the same turn is obviously primarily what you're moving towards, whereas for Nalguidan on the other side, with Emmett's Jungle Hunter in his deck, if he can find that, it's obviously fantastic because it will give him the quickest Shudderwock in all likelihood, but it will destroy some of the valuable battle cries that can go alongside it, like, for example, in his deck, he has a Murmuring Elemental of his own, or the Glacial Shards as well, so the Shudderwock might be a little bit less powerful. As in this game, once again, Viper showing his kind of signature playstyle with these decks of just playing the green card.
Hey, I mean, you guys just all watched a 2-minute breakdown analysis from Rosty where essentially the message was play your 3-drop on 3, and Viper definitely subscribes to that theory. He's playing his 1-on-1 and his 2-on-2. That's just Hearthstone right there, Derek.
And just look how it's worked out. Nalguidan had no fantastic play on that turn. If he goes Mana Tide, it's munched instantly by the Wild Pyromancer, and even if he goes for the Acolyte, it's only drawing one card anyway.
I just love munching Mana Tides. Yeah, you can definitely see the snowball effect. You know, the Pyromancer on turn 2, I think, was an absolute given for the reasons that you gave. That's just good understanding of the matchup. The Glacial Shard on 1, maybe a little debatable, and I think the big swing point is that he has the second one in hand right now, because there are times where you want to Glacial Shard, for example, your opponent's Grumble on the turn where they go for it. But just playing it on 1 didn't really have downside to Viper. Doesn't really have upside either. It's just 1 mana needs to be spent at some point in this game to get Glacial Shard into the Battlecry pool. Why not now?
Exactly, and not only to get it into the Battlecry pool, just to get it out of your hand. One of the main ways that this matchup can go wrong is when you simply have too many cards in hand. You have Acolyte of Pain, Mana Tide Totem in your deck. Overdraw is a real factor, especially after Hagatha has been played, which is why I fully expect and fully hope that for both of these players, Hagatha just never gets played throughout this game. You simply do not need it for your win condition.
Yeah, and it's interesting because people play the Murmuring Elemental version, and one of the first breakdowns that, you know, caster or a player explaining the differences between the deck will always give is that the Murmuring Elemental gives you a 100% infinite Shudderwock combination. Actually not true. Not true if you have played Hagatha. That introduces a tiny failure rate into the pool where you miss the Grumble sequencing on the first activation, and then Hagatha goes off last after all the Saradite Chain Gangs, putting all of your Shudderwocks to 3 health. Then on the second Shudderwock activation, Hagatha is the very first thing to happen, kills all your Shudderwocks, and job done.
I'm just going to straight up say that if that happens to either of these players, they've deserved to have that happen to them. You do not play Hagatha in this matchup.
No, you're fair. It's fair.
Because, I mean, like you said, that's a secondary way in which Hagatha can mess with you, but the primary way is you just have too many cards in hand. If you don't have any space to bounce back Grumbles to your hand, it usually ends up the situation where it's has to be Zola and Hagatha, because then you bounce back like the 9-mana Shudderwock to your hand, or you bounce back a Totem or something with the Grumble effect.
When this deck first appeared, I made a tweet saying that I kind of like feared for casting this deck just because of how hard it is to explain anything in any kind of certain terms.
Yeah.
You want an example of that? Just listen to the last 45 seconds of what we were talking about. Like, can you imagine like just a rank 20 super casual player trying to work out what the hell we just said? It was just gibberish.
Yeah, it's such a weird esoteric matchup where none of the usual laws of Hearthstone apply because you're not really fighting for tempo to win the board through board control. You don't want cards in your hand from Hagatha, like gaining spells is often an objectively bad thing.
Yeah.
But Viper, kind of trying to keep it nice and simple, still just playing the cards he can from his hand.
Yeah. If you want the absolute TLDR version of what we've been talking about this whole time, it's activate your Murmuring with your Grumble, play your Battle Cries, keep your hand empty, don't play Hagatha. That is basically the matchup in a nutshell.
Pretty much. As with a lot of the control decks at the moment, there are just certain rules you have to follow to be playing at a decent base level, like in a Control Mage Mirror or something, waiting with your Alana until they can't play Dragon's Fury because they have no spells in the deck. Things like that. That you just have to know, which obviously both of these players, having brought Shudderwock Shaman to this tournament, will have learnt the rules. So it's the little creative differences in the style of play that will be making all the difference. And so far from Viper, it looks like he's coming up pretty well, denying a good amount of card draw from his opponent, and already with a decent amount of the pretty important battle cries in his hand. Actually, pretty much all of them.
Not far off.
Yeah.
Life Drinker on board, he has Saronite, this is his second Glacial Shard, and Grumble and Shudderwock themselves, they just sat on the left-hand side of the board, the hand. Really that Murmuring Elemental that he's missing for the perfect pieces of the puzzle.
And then in that scenario, you have to start thinking, you know, Murmuring Elemental is not necessary for the combo. It's just to give yourself the highest insurance chance. So against a very slow deck like Control Mage, you would pretty much always wait for that, because then the only way you lose is if your Shudderwock activates in the wrong order. Whereas here for Viper, if his opponent starts to pick up his own card draw, as we see here, things start to slip away from him. Viper could very well just let rip with, say, a Grumble right here to bounce back the Saronite Chain Gangs to hand, which means you have more Saronite Chain Gang activations before the potential Grumble to come down.
Yeah, if you're not going to go infinite, then playing more copies of Saronite Chain Gang, that is your ultimate insurance policy. You know, if you've played one Chain Gang, it's a 50-50 that your Shudderwock is going to bounce back to the hand and be reusable, and then that increases incrementally as you put more copies of the Saronite in hand. So yes, it's looking like a pretty solid Grumble turn right now. The issue is that it becomes a little bit tricky to deal with that Mana Tide if he wants to go Grumble. He can go ahead and just Earth Shock it, but then he's not redeveloping one of these key minions.
I don't think I mind it. I think just any play that dumps cards out of his hand is perfectly fine. I mean, even going with the coin, because with another Saronite Chain Gang in hand, he's probably not going to consider going for Shudderwock on the following turn, especially because the Grumble would bring back Saronite Chain Gangs before it brings back Shudderwocks in themselves. So he wants to, it's probably the point I'm trying to make, is that it will be 2 turns before his own Shudderwock goes off.
I knew there was a point in there somewhere. I was just waiting for it. How's that? It was a compliment. It's a twisted British sardonic version of a compliment.
Is that as close as I'm going to get?
Yes.
It's like yesterday, your tweet was like, I've had a headache all day, but here's this guy. And I was in the background, which is the nicest thing you've ever said to me, I think.
No implication was made. What you inferred, I cannot possibly be held responsible.
And now for Nalguidan, making that play that we've been mentioning throughout so far in this game of Murmuring Elemental into Shudderwock to get that into Grumble, sorry, 1 mana Murmuring Elemental, ready to go for when he does find a Shudderwock of his own, but at the moment, it's simply not there.
I wonder.
For Viper now, it's very much just a zero-sum game of does he feel rushed at any point in this game? Essentially, Viper just has to tune his antennae to Nalguidan's ability to play Shudderwock himself, right? If he ever feels like Nalguidan is getting close, he can go for his own Shudderwock without the guaranteed option. And while that's still an impossibility for Nalguidan, he can just potentially choose to wait, because as long as he's got the coin, he can still draw Murmuring Elemental and Murmuring Elemental coin Shudderwock himself for the 100% guarantee.
That is very true, but it looks to me here like Viper is just going off. He's got Grumble on the board, so in the worst case scenario, he still gets Grumble back to his hand.
Just like that, yeah.
As it does activate first. And so now for Viper, he's making a gamble here that Viper will not be able to clear off both Shudderwocks on this turn, whereas for Nalguidan, if he is able to do so, the combo's just dead for Viper.
I am alarmed by that play from Viper. I don't know what feeling he picked up from the other side of the board that he had to be in a rush. He's got a stack of Saronite chain gangs in his hand that first and foremost just increase his odds so much.
Man, okay, so on the previous turn, Nalguidan has played pretty much everything he needs to play a Shudderwock on the following turn, but given that he bounced back a Murmuring Elemental into his hand, exactly, would he go for that, given that he has on the following turn the absolute 100% chance? And while this is a big risk here for Viper, it looks at the moment like it might be paying off for him. Oh no, the Hagatha's there!
Yeah. Viper has just lost his Shudderwocks. The Grumble bounce does nothing if he has no ability to keep infiniting the Shudderwock, and you saw Viper there just give a little expression and lean back in his chair.
And he has to have known that was a possibility.
He knows if Hagatha is in hand that it nukes his board, yeah, because he knows the Murmuring Elemental is present.
What he has done here, I suppose, is forced his opponent into playing Hagatha, which is a small benefit in your favor, but when you have no Shudderwock of your own, Viper's only real chance here is just dominating board control so entirely. Which he could do in a major fashion. We could see double chain gang Grumble into playing 8 chain gangs. As I think we are getting a good idea as to truly how long this could possibly go on.
If we were ever going to reach the end of whatever this is, it's now. Pyromancer, Lightning Bolt, Farsight, Healing Rain, all in hand. Healing Rain can actually pick up an extra proc off while Pyromancer quite uniquely. Here we go. Farsight is going to get ripped.
And we're starting to see some emotion here from Viper, shaking his head, looking to the side. I think he's starting to see that maybe he just took too big of a risk. Because obviously, in this matchup, getting the first Shudderwock online is probably the single most important thing you can do.
Oh, of course.
But Nalguidan's plays, at least to me, from where I was sitting, didn't suggest that he was going to go for that on the following turn.
Right.
I think Viper could have made the assumption that he had the ability just to wait for a little bit longer. I think he just didn't account for Murmuring Elemental Hagatha.
Viper just staring at a hand, trying to divine some kind of game plan here.
I mean, at the moment, for me, it's looking to be Hagatha into Blazing Invocation into another Shudderwock, which seems rather optimistic, I think it's fair to say.
You found it, though. There is the owl.
Or I suppose as a slightly more realistic option, again, dominating the board control.
Yeah.
It's not likely to happen, but it's not completely absurd. The removal of Shudderwock Shaman does have its limits.
It's true. He does just have to keep loading up the board and hoping that he gets there eventually. Frost Shot can stall here for Nalguidan. Farsight is more card draw that he's been lacking for a couple of turns. He has that cheap Manatide, 2 incredibly cheap Manatides in hand here to really start power cycling his deck now. He's going to run into some of those hand size issues that we've been talking about, and there is that 6-mana Shudderwock. Nalguidan's Murmuring Elemental is gone, though, so remember, now there is that failure rate involved for Nalguidan, but crucially, he has the Hagatha Battlecry in his own Shudderwock, which, as well as being a downside for him, is a huge upside right now because of the board clear effect.
Yeah. sponsor with, I believe, only one Saronite Chain Gang activation in the pool at the moment. It would be for him pretty much just a 50-50 at the moment, yeah, as to whether he would get a Shudderwock back to his hand.
I'm going to make a call here. I feel like Nalguidan just ran out of thinking time that turn, and then he just did stuff. Just stuff that made sense. There were too many options that turn, and he just tried to make some play that wasn't tragic to the point where he just ended up dying, which honestly might just be good enough to get him through this game.
It would definitely appear that way with no Zola in his deck, and obviously the Murmuring Elemental having already been used. Having been forced out by Viper, it is worth pointing out it was...
Yeah, all right.
You know,
if you want to be really glass half full about it.
I'm being incredibly optimistic here for Viper, because he has to be if he's going to be winning this game. Obviously, with no Shudderwock left to him, it's very unlikely. But I suppose plan A here is try and smork his opponent down, dominate the board control. After that, just hope his opponent's Shudderwock fails, because as it currently stands for me, I think Nalguidan can get, at best, a 66% chance to return a Shudderwock to his hand. And that's what this deck is all about in the slow control matchups, maximizing your odds of getting back to your hand.
Which makes you wonder, you know, Nalguidan actually has quite aggressively cycled with Farsights and so on to get to his Shudderwock. Was a better plan, perhaps, just to wait out and clear this board piece by piece, and then get into a position where you just let Viper die to fatigue, as opposed to pushing yourself ahead into fatigue. So if you hit the stalemate, you're going to potentially end up with it.
Viper is simply... Oh, sorry, Nalguidan letting rip with the Volcano before going for Earthshock on the Acolyte of Pain, and it goes in the worst possible scenario for him, I suppose, in getting 3 cards drawn for his opponent.
I think he wants to. I think that's exactly...
He wants to fatigue.
I think that's exactly part of Nalguidan's plan here, because if his Shudderwock fails, then it's a fatigue game, right? Then both decks don't work. So I think that's potentially playing around that eventuality.
As he gets Rumble first, his own one's failed as well!
My God.
What is happening in this game?
This is insane. On top of it all, to now Earthshock this 7-1. There's only 9 health on board, which means Viper's Volcano, even just the Lightning Storm, some of the time can answer this board. And now Daruk, it's a fatigue game.
It's a fatigue game. You were exactly right. Drawing 3 cards for his opponent has kept Nalguidan in the game here.
I was just talking about it, that he was ripping those Farsights on the previous turn. Of course, it seemingly paid out because he hit the Shudderwock with one of the Farsights, brought it down to 6 health, which gave him that chance to win the game immediately. But I think, you know, recognizing he was compensating for that by then Volcanoing the Acolyte is actually a very inspired piece of play to give himself, to cover exactly this eventuality that he's found himself in.
So now all of a sudden, as I was saying, with Hagatha going from a card you'd never want to play in the matchup, Viper wants to find it as quick as he possibly can, because it just gives him more stuff to throw down onto the board. I don't think I've ever seen a Shudderwock Shaman Mirror like this before.
You made 2 statements coming into this mirror match, Daruk.
You want to draw cards?
No. You made 2 statements. You said that in history, some of the craziest games that you've cast have been Shudderwock Shaman Mirrors, and that the person who loses often deserves it. We know that the first one of those is true.
Yeah.
This is insane. We can debate until the cows come home about whether the second is, you know, Viper's aggressive Shudderwocking, Nalguidan drawing cards and then trying to force fatigue back the other way with the Volcano. In the meantime, a spell damage totem just had to come down to rub the salt into the wound for Nalguidan, meaning Storm was a guaranteed clear on all those 6-3s. And now this is a very, very silly game between 2 incredibly toothless decks, just trying to out-fatigue the other.
And if we take a look at the threats that are left in the deck, as these 2 basically just become mid-range decks, I suppose, with...
Mid-range decks?
I mean, what else is there? They're winning through just trying to get something to stick on board. There's Bog Shaper for Viper, which, while he doesn't want to draw too many cards at the moment. He very quickly won't have any minions left in his deck to draw with Fog Shaper, as he does pick it up right off the top, and he can just throw it down at some point in the later stages of the game, just as a body.
Yep. Picking up the absolute boy here, but he's not going to generate it just yet because he knows there are still options like Volcano available to Nalguidan. And with a 1-card deficit here, you know, even potentially just this 1/1 Searing Totem chipping away every turn for the rest of the game could make the difference. But is Viper calculating that he can win this game off this stalemate, from this position, 1 card ahead, Healing Rain still in hand, and 1 damage a turn? Viper thinks he's ahead. Both players are doing nothing. And when a game is going to fatigue, and both players are doing nothing, one of you is wrong. One of you is always wrong.
Yes.
Perplexing.
Exactly.
If you look on Nalguidan's side here, while he does have, I suppose, the superior removal for the moment in case Viper does actually throw anything down. Until Viper decides to throw down some kind of a minion, Nalguidan cannot do anything with his removal. So the onus is on Viper, I think, here at the moment, to do the first thing. And if he doesn't do that, the way it currently stands, I think he's winning.
I do too.
Because it turns out 1 Searing Totem is the superior hero power at the moment.
Yep. I'm sorry, but like, this is exactly what I'm saying. You can't both do nothing. One of you is incorrect. That Storm has been correct for the last 2 turns. It's just Viper worked it out before Nalguidan did. And now Viper has to just wait around, redevelop some threats. He's just going to eventually get that 1/1 Searing Totem back on the board again, and then he's good.
So a couple of options available now for Nalguidan. I'm trying to think, is there any downside of having a frog on your opponent's side of the board? It's such absurdly small stuff like that that can make the difference.
Taking up a board space? So, I don't know.
It's something. It absorbs the damage from Volcano. I mean,
Dimly lit.
I'm struggling, but I don't think there's anything there. I think for Nalguidan, it's still just trying to remove as much as he can until eventually he draws all cards in his deck that cost 3 or less and can eventually throw down Hemet. But when he does,
threat, yeah.
Viper gets a Hex just to throw down.
Unlucky.
None shall
This is it now, just kind of 1 threat a turn if you want to call them threats. You know, Viper still has a Murmuring Elemental as a 1/1 if he really wants, and he still has a Wild Pyromancer as a 3/2. As long as he can just keep playing any source of damage. It honestly doesn't matter.
Yeah.
An amount of damage greater than 0 on board is game-winning for Viper from this position.
perplexing.
But then on the other side for Nalguidan, we've seen the immediate benefit of totems represented in the extra 3 damage or so that a Searing Totem got through. But Nalguidan eventually could find some very important spells here that Viper does not currently have access to without his Hagatha.
Yep.
I'm talking something like Healing Rain in Fatigue would be absolutely massive. A Spellstone to copy his Hemet, something silly like that. Although that would probably never be allowed to happen.
Cryostasis.
A Cryostasis!
It's going to land on that Pyromancer. And I've seen this card be good off Hagatha surprisingly often. Just on your own minions. Just making a big thing in a fatigue situation like this. It doesn't matter if it's frozen. It still needs to get dealt with at some point.
As it looks to me like Volcano is the play for Viper. He knows, as he will be keeping track of any threats in his opponent's deck, that Hemet is still knocking about. And he doesn't want to Volcano his opponent's minions when he's got something on board. So I love this play of Volcanoing even just one pathetic minion from his opponent.
Glacial Shard is a great pickup because now that activates the Sandbinder without drawing a card. That cycles into... is that Spirit? It's Ancestral Spirit, right?
Spirit, yeah. Which, if you can bait out the copy
big.
of Hex, is really, really nice.
Right, but yeah, the Glacial Shard draw, Sandbinder itself got activated. That's now playable without drawing a card. That cycles into a spell, and just Glacial Shard itself is then just another minion that can be played and cycle into a card. Nalguidan this is the swing now where he's starting to take control.
Whoa!
Spirit Echo as well. That is Ancestral
so much
Spirit
value.
for all of his minions. But now hand size is disgusting for Nalguidan.
Well, I mean, when he's in fatigue, that doesn't make any difference.
Sure.
And here making the play of, I guess, trying to bait out the Hex, kind of, from his opponent. So maybe a Hemet can stick in combination with the Spirit Echoes.
I feel like Life Drinker would have been better to pair with the Spirit Echo long term, because Spirit Echo actually rebounds to your hand, right? Whereas Ancestral Spirit actually puts it in place, so then you get just another 6 health swing off the Life Drinker that goes back into your hand. Worth thinking about.
It is definitely worth
Just
thinking
about everything in the world is worth thinking about right now, because that's just where we are with this game of Hearthstone.
But then the other side of that for Nalguidan is by playing 2-mana spell here, he frees up room in his hand, which is kind of relevant with still a couple of cards left to come. Playing a 6/6 Hemet from his hand with the Spirit Echoes is still very nice. And again, it might bait out the Hex from his opponent if he's lucky. Or, I mean, I shouldn't even say lucky. If he can win the game of chicken, it's all just, it's not lucky at all at this point. It's just trying to read your opponent's mind. What will they play?
Healing Rain now picked up for Nalguidan as well. And now the stalemate has swung. Nalguidan looks like he's in control because that Healing Rain was a big upside for Viper. Nalguidan still had that remaining, and as long as he didn't burn it, which was a possibility when you had Hagatha activated and you were drawing things like Ancestral Spirit and Spirit Echo in particular, as long as he didn't burn it, that was going to be the great equalizer. And again, he just needed to recognize that that ridiculous stalemate that Viper created with just a 1/1 Searing Totem on the board, he... All right, drop everything, because that, I believe, if my card art perception is correct, is the Blazing Invocation.
I believe it is. And I mean, even if he can't get Shadowhawk in the most insane of scenarios, it's still a minion. It's something to throw down on the board, which is so good.
You must decide.
Well, I do expect, as he's going for Lightning Bolt on this turn, thus giving himself a little bit more space in hand.
Yep. He is down to 7 cards now, which means he will get 2 of these back, all 3 of these back if they were to all die this turn and just burn the last card in his deck.
Yeah.
And now Viper hits fatigue first, crucially, because he hasn't been able to keep control of the board. He hasn't been able to just keep pushing that 1 damage every turn and get control. And now Viper is looking in a mess.
Yeah, it's starting to look very dire for him indeed. The long-term benefit of Hagatha definitely starting to shine through, even though in the immediate, Viper was looking to maybe dominate the board with a Searing Totem just to get in that little bit of extra damage. For Nalguidan, as we started to get a better look at his deck, the Healing Rain knocking about in there as well very easily counteracts that.
That's not much. He needs higher impact than that.
You must decide.
And now you see the big reason why these Pyromancer and Murmuring Elemental just weren't being played previously. He just needed to pick up big options off them, off the Hagatha. And now the last card is a Hex for Nalguidan. Blazing Invocation is going to be ripped. Can Nalguidan go out in style here? No.
Oh.
Hey, Prince Keleseth
Yeah,
buffs
there's
the rest of his deck.
No 2-cost minions in there. I mean, do you just pick Windshear Stormcaller because it's the biggest minion?
The funny thing is, you could discover Keleseth here and it still wouldn't be the worst Keleseth discover we've seen this year.
Got him. Very nice.
I will show you
Oh, hello.
Ooh. That is not bad at all. Even with limited access to low overload outside of obviously the Volcano, which he probably doesn't want to play. It's not bad. He's assembling our dumb idea for a combo deck with Wind Fury and Spellstone.
Well, let's not go into that. This
Right.
cast has already taken a turn for the worse. Let's not tell them about Leroy OTK Shaman.
Oh, they're not ready. Viper just going for throwing down any minion he
just had
can
to
generate a spell.
Yeah.
He knows he's
Manatide-
never winning this.
Yeah, Manatide is just suicide here, but he just needs something.
Yeah.
Acolyte of Pain, same deal. When this wins, we are going to finally, I imagine, see the concession from Viper. Ladies and gentlemen, believe it or not, it's over.
Continent, but he hasn't got there yet, and Viper has got himself a pretty respectable matchup to try and pull things back.
And to add to all of that as well, Nalguidan had himself in this exact position last year as well. When I say last year, I mean the last seasonal championship that occurred. It was summer championships back then. That was the last time we did one of these events, and now we're somehow all the way back at summer again. Nalguidan has qualified for those back-to-back, and last time he was in this exact spot and had it all snatched away by Dirty Rats and by Old Boy. So you just can't imagine putting yourself in his shoes, the stress that he's going for, but we at least got a little window of insight into how he was feeling during that game. But anyway, let's focus in. Taunt Druid versus Big Spell Mage. The Cliff Notes version, Mr. Brown.
I mean, I think as a basic rule, the first thing that obviously comes to mind is Polymorph for the Big Spell Mage. Fantastic way to deal with a lot of the big taunts and obviously mess with the Witching Hour that Nalguidan will be using to try and summon back his Hadronox. But generally, it's definitely not quite so simple as that, because you can just make boards as the Taunt Druid, even just with your first Hadronox, that are simply too difficult for the Mage to deal with. So that's definitely what Nalguidan is going to be trying to move towards. Make an awkward board state for his opponent at one point in the game, and then just close things out.
Yeah, in my experience from the Taunt Druid side of this, one of the big kickers is Anti-Magic Shell. From Lich King, because, you know, when you say you can make a big board that they can't deal with, that's true, but they can often deal with it over a couple of turns, right? They blizzard it, they lock it out, then they have the Flame Strike, or even better, the Dragon's Fury into Flame Strike to then wipe it away. Suddenly, Anti-Magic Shell can just make an absolute mess of that situation and just force them to freeze your board once, freeze it again. That's the only two freezes they play in their deck outside of Water Elementals. So for me, Lich King is the linchpin in this matchup for Taunt Druid. You really want to get that card rolling as soon as you can.
You do indeed.
I
But
just thought of that.
that was pretty good. Yeah, nice little half run. You got Bar Soul. But you very often only have one turn with a Lich King before it just gets straight up polymorphed. You're very rarely going to be resurrecting it with Hadronox whatsoever. So there's another kind of counterplay you can make as an important point to bring up in this matchup is baiting out polymorphs. If you can put your opponent in a situation where they are under so much pressure that they have to use both polymorphs before your Hadronox even comes down, then you end up in the very interesting situation where you can cube your Hadronox or even cube a Witching Hour after the Hadronox has been resurrected, which makes things an awful lot more difficult for the Mage.
Right. We saw Viper play this match all the way back on day one. Seems a lifetime ago at this point. Very greedy with his polymorph activation in this very matchup. He was holding out for those cubes even that hit the Hadronox, feeling that he could deal with everything else.
Yeah.
So it'll be interesting again to see how he chooses to allocate those removals, if he can even draw them on time, because right now, Nalguidan is ready to go for an 8-mana turn, and Viper does not have a polymorph in sight right now, meaning if there was a Lich King draw from Nalguidan, it could be fireworks.
It could be very scary indeed, especially as Viper, I mean, you were talking about last time being very conservative with his resources. This time, being just very liberal with them, throwing down the copy of Voodoo Doll there just to clear off a 3/6 on the board, which was not doing all too much at all. Do you think maybe he's learned his lesson, is just trying to make sure he can't get snowballed at all here?
It's hard to say. I believe he even won one of those games where he was going crazy late with his polymorphs. I might be remembering that wrongly, but it's definitely a valid strategy, but it does potentially leave you very vulnerable to those kind of anti-magic shell memes later on in the game, as well as other small options that can beat you. I think this Arcane Keysmith, he would have been looking specifically for explosive runes first and foremost. because this turn 8 is just terrifying coming out from Nalguidan here. If there is a Lich King, Viper would just be in a world of trouble right now. He's just got nothing against it.
Yeah, he was really just looking for any other spell there to be, or secret there to be honest. Even a counter spell to get rid of the coin to maybe deny an Okar is not that ridiculous. And I suppose possibly if he could bait out with a Spellbender and naturalize away from a Hadronox, something like that could maybe be beneficial. But basically, outside of a Mirror Entity there to copy a Lich King, there was very little that was good for him.
Yep. Mirror Entity would have copied the Lich King, and Explosive Runes would have damaged the Lich King to the point where the Keysmith at least contested it and gave him the answer on the board. But yeah, outside of that, he did not have much game going on at all. And still no Polymorph in sight for Viper, and Nalguidan is getting very close to being able to go off right now. It's not a huge Hadronox board, but it's a Hadronox board, and it's a dead Hadronox, which is not a given in this matchup.
As Nalguidan is going to be starting to narrow down what these secrets could be. It's not Counterspell, it's not Explosive Runes or Mirror Entity or Vaporize or Ice Barrier. I think he can narrow it down to pretty much exactly Spellbender at this point, which is fantastic for him because he won't be falling into the trap of getting his Hadronox polymorphed because he goes Hadronox into Naturalize on the same turn.
But Spellbender, though.
Yeah, but he'll do something first. He'll swipe, or he can play around it, is what I'm saying.
So is this the turn then when you want to, if you're Nalguidan, continue to just test and break those unknown secrets for you?
I mean, the thing is, though, in this situation, you kind of want Swipe to go on exactly the Lich King.
Right. There it goes. Spellbender bites the dust. Viper did take it just for a little bit of disruption. Of course, it would make a complete mess of that naturalized play as we were talking about. Viper probably under no illusions that it was going to get that far, to still be hanging around to make that happen. But it's something that, you know, diverted Nalguidan's plan, made him have to do something different than just jamming that Hadronox, getting it in the pool with the naturalize.
Absolutely, but here for Nalguidan, I would argue not even that sad to see his taunt minions dying here, because very often against the big spell mage, you can struggle with getting your large minions to actually go into the pool of dead taunts for Hadronox to resurrect. Whereas now Nalguidan will have to start getting a threatening board very quickly indeed, as an on-curve Frostlich Jaina for Viper definitely starts to show he's going to be speeding up in this match.
That little play from Viper, the Keysmith taking the Spellbender, it gave him one more turn. It gave him one more turn to draw and play his Skulking Geist before that Hadronox Naturalize came down. He delayed Nalguidan for one turn to have to break that Spellbender, but he did not get paid out for it. He just has to make do with a poxy old Frostlich Jaina on curve instead.
As for Viper now, looking at the way this hand is working out for him, generally the way that the mage will struggle in this matchup is that they have to remove opposing taunt boards with purely spells, which, as I've highlighted, often does not work out. You need some pretty precise combinations of spells, like Blizzard into Flamestrike, or Blizzard Flamestrike even in some scenarios.
Right.
But in this scenario where Nalguidan doesn't have the ability to kill off his Hadronox after the Witching Hour has been played, Viper could start to dominate the board on his own purely with water elementals, as long as he doesn't let himself get surprise lethal by his opponent through some kind of branching paths nonsense. He's looking pretty good. And there it is, the fact that Viper kind of has a face-up polymorph in essence, because Nalguidan knows that it's in hand, is pretty good for him, because it will just scare Nalguidan away from ever trying to risk a Witching Hour. And I suppose, arguably, if he did try and risk it, you could just polymorph it, which works out well for you. But it just slows the game down very nicely.
Sorry, you were saying?
Yeah. More fool me that Nalguidan manages to pick up the perfect card.
Right, I do somewhat wonder, like, is his taunt pool good enough right now to be going off on Witching Hour Cube? Because it's a lot of Ironwood Golem right now.
Yeah.
He does not really want a lot of Ironwood Golem in this matchup. There's a Primordial Drake in hand that is actually really good against this board state. I think it's probably worth getting that one more bigger taunt into the pool. Speaking of getting taunts in your pool, by the way, despite how the animations looked on the previous turn, I think those both were natural picks from Viper. I believe if you time out on the Discover choice, it just takes the far left option, and the Sunwalker was the far right.
Time waits for no one.
So I think he did manage to get in everything he needed to do, did Viper on the previous turn. But yeah, I do like this play from Nalguidan.
I agree.
Definitely easy to get suckered in by that Witching Hour cube play, but he knows that he gets back aboard with a good chunk of Ironwood Golem in it, and he knows that his cube gets polymorphed after the fact. So he needs to make a board that wins the game off this one play. And Ironwood Golems just aren't cutting it. I wouldn't be surprised to see him keep waiting for Lich Kings, for Sleepy Dragons, even from here.
That was going to be my extension of your argument there. Like, do you just wait forever until you get some of the bigger cards like Lich King and the Sleepy Dragon? As for Viper, he's just going to start winning this board, at which point, you know, you can get yourself a nice big board with maybe one more Lich King in there, one more Sleepy Dragon.
Yeah.
But the extra 3, 4, 5 attack that generates onto a board for you, can that possibly be worth it? Basically, no matter what it is for Nalguidan here, he's going to have to hope for a pretty specific set of cards that are not in his opponent's hand.
Right. Yeah, Nalguidan not messing about, but it looks like just going to go straight down the cube route. But yeah, the scary part of this is that he just knows. He knows that there aren't two more Hadronox after this play. He knows this is just the board state. 3 Ironwood Golems.
That feels absolutely dreadful. As I mentioned, the Lich King very often not resurrected by Hadronox because it just gets polymorphed. But here for Viper, it's not even necessary. His opponent just has a terrible board of taunts.
And there's the play. Blizzard to stall and set yourself up for the Dragon's Fury on the next turn. And because we haven't got to Lich King yet, Nalguidan has no way to try and disrupt this.
Cube, I suppose, is an interesting way of trying to mess with what your opponent's doing, because obviously it gives you, as Cube always does, some resilience to a complete board wipe.
Right.
And for Nalguidan, it's going to have to be some kind of a creative play in this scenario, because I think if the game just plays out in the standard way we're both expecting, where he relies on a 50-50 from Witching Hour, Viper should just win.
Maybe. If he hits the 50-50, does Nalguidan, then it becomes interesting, because as the Spellstone being drawn has just reminded me, he has not yet been Geisted, so he does have a natural way to destroy that that second Witching Houred Hadronox if he does pick up the 50-50.
But he has to find it right now, because Viper just goes Dragon's Fury into Dragoncaller Alana on the following turn.
Sure.
And just destroys his opponent, or at the very least makes so many big minions that he can trade into a Hadronox board and then doesn't actually do enough to kill Viper.
You are correct, sir.
And even in the worst case scenario for Viper, if he gets a polymorph, is that bad? That's 2 less Primordial Drakes that have then died on board, which means a Hadronox, if it were to come back, would just be like 5 Ironwood Golems. And I guess wondering if he does even need to go for it at all, because he will be thinking of the exact possibility, with only 7 cards left in his opponent's deck, of second Witching Hour into the Carnivorous Cube. But I think he's realizing if he does get the very unlikely scenario of the 50-50 cube and having it in hand and Carnivorous Cube all in one turn, it's worth to take the much more likely odds that you can just go Dragon's Fury into Dragoncaller Alana.
Yep. There is the Meteor. He's going to drop this Novice Engineer down alongside this now as well. Having nailed the sweep. Play a little quickly there. Maybe the Doomsayer off the Novice Engineer was a stronger play than the Raven Familiar.
I think that just opens you up to straight up, without even the need for a cube, just Witching
Oh, you're
Hour.
so right. You are so right. Yeah, my mistake. I just got excited wanting to set up an Alana. Just like, I want to tempo a 9-drop next turn. Let's play this Doomsayer and just lose the game.
I mean, that is the late game combo. That's what Doomsayer is for
Right.
in the late game for this deck. It's to set up Alana. Now for Nalguidan, he really wants to be holding on to these branching paths because with the way it currently stands, his board of taunt minions will be very unimpressive. A lot of Ironwood Golems in there. And so when he does get it back, if he can get any minions to stick, the +4 attack buff that he could get off of the branching paths may be absolutely crucial.
Nalguidan just still has a good O card. Like, with 4 cards remaining in his deck, his card's just still fine. Why do you exist?
I mean, it's fine, but it's not great. It's probably not good enough.
Let's be real.
Yeah.
Change my mind. This card sucks.
Time melts away.
Was this Nalguidan's thinking, though? Just get enough competition on the board that maybe he can live a turn if Alana comes down? Like, maybe he can just grind through with swipe and branching paths?
I mean, it's just hoping that Viper somehow messes up. Like, he sticks a board of reasonable minions, double branching paths buff to close out the game.
Yeah. And with Umbra in play, right, that's another activator for Nalguidan's side.
That's true.
It's saying to Viper, hey, if you want to spend your 9 mana on your Alana this turn, well, there is a real spooky minion that you have potentially creating insane things with Hadronox Cube.
Yeah. Which is, I think, why Viper is taking so long, because one of the big possibilities he's considering here, I think, is just straight up Doom Pact coming off the board, because these are very threatening minions. In the end, just going to clear off that Umbra. He knows how scary it is. He was also thinking about Polymorph, because maybe preemptively making that Witching Hour less likely to activate is even more important.
Yeah.
And even just if there wasn't a Witching Hour, if the Umbra had been left up, just Cube on Master Okar is not that bad. That's a pretty scary board you've all of a sudden generated.
Yep. Yeah, when I said it was powerful with Witching Hour and Cube, I didn't mean in combination,
right?
Because that's just overkill, right?
Yeah.
Like, you don't have enough board space to make all that happen. But either or in that spot would have been fantastic if Umbra was left alive.
I think as Nalguidan starts to see this game slipping out of his fingers, might be going for the branching paths just to draw a couple more cards and try and find that Witching Hour 100% on the very next turn.
We can still activate it with the Naturalize here, right? Even if he draws it.
Time waits for no one.
That is nothing.
I mean, he can now guarantee Witching Hour on the
I'm
following
almost
turn.
out of cards.
There finally is the Lich King. Second from last. Just swipe Wrath to clear the board, keeping what board state he has, deals with the Baron Geddon. Viper now has that freedom. Freedom for Alana to hit the board.
I don't think he even needs to go for that, because he's got an unbeatable combo where he has Polymorph for a cube with Hadronoxes inside it, and then you can just go for Doom Pact to clear off the board. And even though he's destroyed every card in the deck there,
sure,
Nalguidan has no counterplay to Dragoncaller Alana.
Time melts away.
I agree with all of your words, Mr. Brown. Nalguidan doesn't have any counterplay for Dragoncaller Alana right now.
Outside of, what, Lich King into a Doom Pact of his own?
Sure.
But then he's probably just dead because he has to spend a turn.
Yeah. We're doing this thing that casters do where we argue over 2 different lines in 100% one game.
Yeah.
The time is now.
And Viper, or having that exact argument in his head, in actually both of our voices as well.
It's very odd. That's probably why he looks so kind of not infused all the time.
Yeah, I mean, I have to listen to myself in my own head all the time, and I look unenthused all the time as well, so story checks out.
Quite emphatically unenthused, actually, I would say.
Fitty fitty!
Oh.
Was it worth it? Was it worth waiting for all 30 cards? Just to rip a sheep?
And there it is. Go on, let's hear some noise for a sheep. There we go. Someone is very passionate about sheep in the audience.
Say, there was like barking somewhere along the lines. Someone's just got the wrong animal entirely. Never mind. All right, 2 games to 2. This series is stretching it out to the absolute limit, which means, of course, Derek, it's going to end up on this game number 5. What matchups do we have left? Nalguidan's Druid versus Viper's Shaman.
That's exactly right. The Shudderwock Shaman up against the Taunt Druid. One of the absolute key matchups of HCT Summer Championships thus far. We've seen it multiple times go one way or the other. And I mean, as with any game of Hearthstone, you can always say anything can happen, but I would have to double say that with Shudderwock Shaman. Some truly absurd things have happened, even just in this series alone.
Yeah, some truly absurd things can happen, and we watched literally all of last game just condensed into one 40-minute hell ride of a game.
Yeah.
Good
much.
talk.
There are no words to say about that game.
There's very few words to say about this series, but many words to say about the position that these players find themselves in, because for Nalguidan, again, this is the last game. Win or go home, qualify to the World Championships after finding himself in exactly this position in the Summer Championships last year, or see it all crumbling down before his very eyes instead, and seeing the stoic German Viper take his spot.
Stoic though he may be, turning his eyes up to the heavens there, just hoping, surely this has to be his time to get through to the Summer Championship, to the World Finals, sorry.
Full mulligan.
Makes sense.
Better.
Looking for, I would argue, pretty much exactly Manatide Totem as one of the first cards, because you can really punish the fact that Druid is mulliganing exclusively for ramp, pretty much. If they're doing nothing in their early turns, you can really get a nice, quick start and draw a lot of cards off of Manatide.
And I mean, Darek, like, this hand for Nalguidan, is this one of the worst possible hands or one of the best possible hands he could have?
I think we'll meet in the middle.
Okay.
It could absolutely get the job done. Obviously, if we look at the build he's got here, 2 Dragon Hatchers and only 1 Sleepy Dragon. So he still could get a very powerful copy of Master Oakhart as long as he does not draw another dragon here. And he's got a fair few turns to do so.
Not like this.
He's still like 3 or 4 turns away from it with Nourish into turn 8 into Oakhart.
Now Viper has options. He can get some guaranteed cycle off his Acolyte of Pain here, which I do like. The Manatide can come later. He does choose to hold on to the coin here. He's just leaving it on the board. He's saying, this is a very attractive swipe for my opponent, but then if my opponent swipes, guess what? Manatide Totem follows that all up afterwards. There you go. Breaking his curve to keep out with that Manatide Totem. Knows that he has some time in this matchup, doesn't value the mana efficiency of the Life Drinker. This was the setup. Holds onto his coin, drops the Acolyte, sacrifices it to the gods of Swipe. Instead, gets maximum value out of that Manatide.
And I think I like this a little bit more, taking a second look at it, because Manatide to me is slightly more controlled card draw. You know exactly what you're getting in 1 card a turn, whereas with Acolyte of Pain, if he was to see something like Wrath Spellstone with a Naturalize perhaps even, there was the potential for that clip you've all seen, I'm sure, about 50,000 times.
It's still good!
Of Scintillol burning his key card. And while we do see Shudderwock in hand, Grumble being burned, something important like that, could be very devastating. So Viper here, all in on making sure he cannot have those key cards burned. But still, he ends up with, what, 9 cards in hand?
It's a relatively safe turn, I think, to leave yourself vulnerable to a Naturalize from your opponent, because going into 8 and going into 9 against Taunt Druid, they just want to play an 8-drop and a 9-drop. That's just what they want to do, and it's very hard to convince them to do otherwise, no matter how juicy a proposition you present.
Oh, as the second copy of Dragon Hatcher is found.
Oh, Nalguidan, not like this.
This is unbelievable. He draws Hadronox, 2 dragons, and both Dragon Hatchers with a Master Oakhart in hand. If he plays that now, it fetches only an Ironwood Golem.
I wonder. Fluffy, snuggle, fetch!
Fortunately, Fluffy and/or Snuggles is still remaining in the deck, so he can still generate a board. But this is heartbreaking for Nalguidan.
Again, the hidden information that Nalguidan is relying on here with the Dragon Hatcher could make Viper play in a somewhat awkward fashion, because he obviously does not know that the Sleepy Dragon is in hand for Nalguidan.
Right.
So potentially baiting out one of the powerful cards here, like Volcano or Hex, or more likely, I suppose, an Earthshock. Although even that is a very valuable card against something like a Cube or a Hadronox later on in the game.
And it sounds like a ridiculous thing to say to look at it, but this is about as intense and engaged as I have seen Viper over all 4 of the days. Leant forward, head in hands. He's been pretty much in the same pose throughout all of his games, which is just leant back, looking very, very calm and carefree. But now suddenly even he is feeling these stakes piling up on top of him.
I mean, how
That sounds delicious now that I think.
you want to feel the stakes piling up on top of you? But for Viper, it would be impossible to not feel the pressure here for him. So much on the line in this one game, qualifying through to the World Championships. We've seen what that can do for a player's career. Now looking at the plays for Nalguidan, pretty much everything looks rather underwhelming. A Sleepy Dragon here is the best threat he can throw down. But what does that actually do to throw him back on the board?
Oh, that's a Grumble with a Black Knight on the board. Oh, I need a moment.
That's so disgustingly good. He just needs to make sure he has room in his hand.
Well, also here's the thing. Is it a bait though? Because you would end up grumbling 0 Saronite Chain Gangs and 0 Murmuring Elementals, which means you give yourself just about the lowest possible odds of repeated Shudderwocks later in the game.
That is a true fact.
It might be a trap. This might be too good to be true, Darren.
It's just such a big tempo swing though, and I think Viper, as I would agree with him here, is realizing this is not one of those matchups in which you have all the time in the world to give yourself the absolute best possible Grumble turn.
I think part of the Black Knight tech coming into the deck is to enable situations like this, right? Where you don't need the Shudderwock OTK to win the game. You can just nuke their board with Black Knights and Glacial Shards and it's good enough.
Yeah, it's not only the immediate benefit you get from Black Knight, as you pointed out. Even if he just plays one Shudderwock, freezes their whole board, blows half of it up with Black Knights, that will probably just win him the game anyway.
This is desperation now for Nalguidan. Just has to go fishing. He needs an activated Hadronox sooner rather than later at this point. Cube is not it. It's too expensive on the first activation. And now with additional tools like Earthshock.
He's 1 damage off lethal, I think.
He is 1 damage off lethal if Nalguidan plays a single taunt here.
And what does Nalguidan do outside of that? Does he just go for Branching Paths, Oaken Summons? Branching Paths could be really good to push that damage later on in the game.
Time waits for no one.
But he has to make some kind of a really defensive play or he will just die.
Roaring now with the Branching Paths. Witching Hour is still nothing at this point as well. Branching Paths number 2. Really needs that naturalize.
Ooh. Doesn't even manage to hit a taunt off of the Oaken Summons, and now he will be, what, 7 damage off of dying, which is really not a position you want to be in.
That armor gain ends up being crucial though, because he was just dead to Shudderwock at this point. Just the life trinker going off.
And for Viper, if his if his Grumble survives on board for 1 more turn, he can just go Shudderwock and play the 1-mana Grumble afterwards, at which point he just has a 1-mana Shudderwock in hand.
Fair point.
Which means Nalguidan has to develop his own board, put up a defensive measure in the form of taunts or health, and clear his opponent's board all in 1 turn. And I'm just not seeing how it's possible.
What to do? There's little time.
Just cycling the Ancestral Healing essentially here, just rebuffing this Black Knight. Glacial Shard comes out just for a bit of extra freezing power in case he needs it on the following turn against a Hadronox board coming down. And again, it feels horrible to say this, but is Nalguidan's dream slipping away from him at the final hurdle one last time? The most important game of his life since the last most important game of his life.
He just has to draw here. Nothing else even comes close to keeping him alive, and I don't think there's anything left in his deck that can do it for 6 mana.
Armor's just not going to cut it here, but you're right, the options just aren't there for Nalguidan to find answers in his deck. Takes the armor, cycles the Wrath now, looking for an out, finds Spellstone, but it's unbuffed.
Time waits for no one.
If he'd have Wrathed first, the Spellstone can come into hand, and then the Branching Paths. It's all very niche, and it looks like Nalguidan, at least visually, has conceded there. Game number 5 is gone over to Viper. Nalguidan, again, your heart goes out to the Argentinian. Came so close again, and yet still so far from that World Championship appearance. But again, it's Europe booking the second of 2 spots in the World Championship so far.
Huge congratulations to Viper there, as we finally get to see a smile on his little face, and it's a well-deserved one indeed, despite one of the craziest Shadowhawk Shaman mirrors I've ever seen. Very questionable play